Hi everybody, how are you? Welcome to episode 12 of the YouTube channel that's dedicated to the Lake Erie and North Shore Railroad. And this is a continuation, part 2 of the control panel series. In this episode, we're going to learn how to wire up the double throw, double pull switches, and we're also going to look at how to wire up and connect the resistors and everything to the LEDs so they don't burn out. So what I've decided to do with this control panel series, once I got putting everything together, I realized how long it was, so I've divided it into 4 parts. Okay, so we'll try to get these out to you as soon as we can so that those of you that are starting the control panel series will be able to finish it in a reasonable time. Okay, excellent. So before that, I'm really missing that old railroad soul.
Across the prairies to the sea, they laid the iron for the rails that we ride. They shared their lives, their hearts, and their pride. They had really so.
Hi, we're back. Just going to show you how I put in these switches. I use these micro switches, which are double pull, double throw, on. Okay, so we're going to solder a wire across. And once these are mounted, I thought I'd mount them first and then do the wiring. I don't know, maybe that's not good, but I'm going to give it a go. That's why I made this jig to hold the boards. Now I'm going to put in two. So I've put in some of the switches already, but I'm going to put in these two, and I'll give you a couple tips about what I've found as I've been putting these in. So the first thing you want to do is you want to take off. I'm gonna get a pointer here. Okay, so you want to take off the outer nut because you're not going to need that. So you just take that off. Okay, and then there's a lock washer here. So you're going to just put that aside. And then there's this funny thing here that has a little notch at the top. You can see there's a little notch here, and then there's a little angle part here. So this angle part needs to face out into the glass because when you tighten it, that's going to hold it in place. And the little ridge has to slide in to the, I don't know if you can see this, there's a little ridge here on the switch. So now that you've got that in place, your switch is ready to go in. Now always click the switch up when you put it in, and that way when you go to put on your lock washer and your nut, oh sorry, one more thing, in my control panel I've decided to take, there's another nut on this, I've decided to take that off and have the switch come out farther. So this nut's used to set the depth on the switch, and I'm just going to have mine go all the way back. So now I'm going to put my thing back in here. Now my switch is ready to go in. I'm just going to put the switch in. Let's put my lock nut on. And then I'm going to bolt it in place. I just screw this in until it's finger tight, and then I'm going to use this little tool that I got. this. Let me get it in focus for you. Okay, so this is just a deep socket. It's an 8mm deep socket. And if you look in the end, it goes very deep, so you can get over top of the switch and onto that bolt. Okay, now this is the thing that's on it when you buy it, but I just kept it on because it actually is really good for what I want. Gives me something to use to get some leverage to tighten these bolts. Okay, so now everything's in place. Now you're going to hold your switch so that the little groove right here is directly up. And that way you know you have it straight. Now I'm holding the back while I tighten this, and then I'm going to tighten it until I feel that little bar at the back bend into place, and then it's quite tight. See? Okay, so let's do one more. So we're going to take the nut off. Trying to get it so everybody can see this. I'm going to take all this stuff off. Loosen this other nut off. Put this funny looking thing in so that the little knob, the little fold, is facing out. So the little thing there is facing out towards the switch. Make sure my switch is in the upright position. Put this through, lock washer, nut. Making sure it's straight up, tighten into place. Okay, now the beauty of making our sizing of our holes wide enough for this washer is that now this tool can fit on the end and we can tighten them. Now I just want to show you one other thing that I did here. When I was cutting these, what I did was I went out and I looked for a screw that had the head just slightly bigger than the washer here. And then I used that for my cutting. So this was my sort of guide to do the cutting so that they're all right. So I put this center part here over the hole, and then I just use this as my guide for doing the cuts, and it worked out really well. So just an old screw that I found in my scrap pile, but it had the magic size of being just a little bit bigger than those washers. So you can just set that on over the hole. I'm trying to find one over the hole and cut. I don't know, just a little tip. Okay, so I'm going to put the rest of these switches in. You know how to do it now, or at least how I do it. And we'll get the rest of these switches in, and then maybe we'll look at putting some LEDs in. Okay, be back soon. Okay, so things have been progressing here with the, as you can see, with the control panel. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a update on sort of what has happened. So I've turned the actual control panel around. So remember last time we installed all the switches, then I just turned that around, mounted it back onto the to the jig. So now I have access to the back of all the switches. And then I have connected the wires based on what my idea is of how to wire this up. So I'll just, sorry about this, take you through sort of the wiring, my wiring, Just move some of these things out of the way here. My wiring thought process that I have used. Okay, so this wire, these two wires here, okay, black and red, are coming in from the power supply. And the power supply is one of these sort of computer power supplies. And let's turn this around. And you can see this one is, I don't know if you can read that or not, but 12 volts, 3 amps. So it's got considerable grunt behind it. And it's coming in with this very thick wire. And it goes into this switch, which then connects to this wire, which then connects to one of these multi-unit connectors. Now, I then have another multi-unit connector right here, which is connected to this one. And all of those connections are with this heavy wire. Just get the gauge on that for you. So this is 0.2 millimeter. So there's the wire that I'm using. 0.2 millimeter. Is it 0.2 or is it 2? It says 0.2 millimeter. Okay. But it is pretty heavy duty wire. So I want the 12 volts coming in and the 12 volts going out and supplying the blocks, okay, to not be impeded by the wire size. So that's why I put that in, because my thought process is when all these things are on at the same time, we may have a little bit of heat pulling through those wires, or too much current. I don't know. I haven't done the calculations or anything, but I just wanted to err on the safe side. So this control panel, as we've discussed before, is really 2 control panels in one. So this switch here is going to turn off and on the local or manual switching, which is all this stuff. Okay, this is all the manual switching, and I'll show you how that works in a minute. The second switch turns on the dispatcher control, which will be from the all of the computer control and also the Digitrax remote or stationary, decoders. Okay, so I haven't hooked this up yet, but we'll have a separate video on that. But what I wanted to show you was how this is actually hooked up. So I'm just going to take this switch here and the blue, what I've done, just to explain the wiring. So I've taken a sort of piece of Cat5. I'm just going to try to get the actual writing on this for you. Anyway, I don't know if this is helpful. I found this, had rolls of this stuff because they put some cameras at the office and they were going to throw this stuff out. And I said, wait a minute, I might be able to use that someday. So that's the stuff right there. So it's Ethernet, verified Ethernet. That's the type of 23 AAWG, and there are 4 paired wires inside. So what you do is you just take this wire and you slice it, and then these wires come out, and then you just cut that off, and then you unwind the paired wires. Now I've been using some colored wire here. So you'll see my color system is that the blue and the white, so the blue and the white wire here, are power out to the tortoise engines, or to the tortoise motors, the slow switch motors. And I'll just show you these here. So that's the ones that we're using. Slow motion switch machine. Okay. So the blue and white are power out to the tortai, and they are hooking. So these are double throw, double pull switches, and they are hooking to the center. So the blue and the white blue tracer are hooking to the center poles, and the power coming in from the power supply is going to the top pole, and then we have a wire from the black at the top connecting to the other side, and a red at the top connecting to the other side. Now I'm gonna show you how to wire these because I think it's important to actually go through the whole process. Now, some of you may not want to watch that because you know how to do it, or you know, do it a different way, whatever. But I think it's important for me to go through the whole process, even though it's a bit tedious, because I think it's important for you to see how long it takes to do these switches. And you know, then if you want, you can go back and you can rewind and you can go step by step with me, or you can just fast forward ahead if you don't want to watch this. And but I think my purpose, one of the purposes of doing this YouTube channel, is to actually take you through the whole process. So if you do need to go back and rewind it and see it, or if you say, wow, I didn't realize it took that long, because you will have to manage your time. These switches take a little bit longer than you think to install, and so you're not going to come out, for instance, and do this control panel in the morning. It's gonna, you'll see as we go through the process, it takes a while. So what I've done is I've saved this last switch here that hasn't been wired yet, and I'm going to take you through the whole process. Now, before I do that, I'm going to mount the phone into a holder so that it doesn't shake around so much. Okay, so I'm going to go do that. Now, one more thing. These pegs here are to attach 2 screws, okay, which I have used to fill in the switch holes where I am not using a switch, because I have connected the 2 crossover switches, and I have slaved one to the other. So we only needed 1 switch, because I clicked that switch and both of the switches will move. And I'll show you how I wired that up once we have the tortai in place on the bench, and I'll show you the whole wiring of those. It's really, look, it's straightforward, but it can be a bit confusing, because what I'm using now are red-green lights, and we want them to be reversed, so we have to wire it backwards, basically. So I'll take you through that in a separate video. Okay, so right now I'm just going to get the camera ready. We're going to install this switch, and I'll take you through all of the steps. Okay, stay with us. Okay, so we're back, and I'm just going to start the process. Just checking the time. Okay, we're going to give it a little bit of a timer on this. So you're going to need some pliers, some clippers, screwdriver appropriate for the bars you're using. Okay, you're going to need a soldering iron, which is here. You need some solder here, and you're going to need some wire. Now, I have pre-cut a black and a red to the appropriate length. But we also need to cut some small pieces to do the reversing section on the switches. And what I do is I basically remove the stuff at the one end, so I take off the covering to the wire at one end, cut a little piece, probably about that long, just long enough to fit into the strippers. You strip that. I'm going to take the red wire, which I've cut already. I'm going to strip that. And I'm going to hook these two together. Just like this. Sorry. Now, this is just to hold them until I can tin them together. Okay, so that's the red wire. And we're going to do the same for the black wire. So I'm just going to trim the one end, cut a small piece. Remove this. Okay, perfect. Remove an end off the black wire. I'm going to put these two together. Okay, so one is going to be power in, or these are both red and black, will be the power in. So the long ones will connect to the power board, and the short ones will be the reversing for the switch. So the next step is we have to tin these together. So we have to tin and trim. So we're just going to put some tin on these. Okay. Now we're going to trim them because we're going to put them on those very, very small nubs coming out of the switch. So we're just going to trim that back so that it will fit on the nub. Just like that. I'm going to place that wire there. Do the same to the black. Yeah, so the what I have found with doing these, you get a system and then you follow that system. Don't try to cut corners. Try to cut corners, end up costing yourself a lot more time, and you get a bit frustrated. But other than that, I've actually really enjoyed putting this together. Now what we're going to do is we're going to tin the switch. So I'm going to take a little bit of solder on the end of the iron, and I'm going to put it right on those little tabs that we're going to be hooking the wires to. Now I always like to have enough solder on there that you get like a little ice cream cone coming up. And trust me, if you skip this step or you don't have enough solder on there, it is going to frustrate you completely because the wires won't stick very well. So this is a step that you just have to do. And I'll just go. Now I'm just going to zoom in here to show you that. Sorry about the wobble. But I'm working alone, and that's just how it is. So that is how I want the switch to look. So you see the little blobs of solder on there? Okay, so I'm just going to re-establish the positioning now of the camera so we can see what we're doing here. Okay, so now what I'm going to be doing is hooking the wires we just prepared onto the switches. And to do this, you need a helping hand. And you will, if you take the time to set this up properly, you will save yourself a ton of time. And I mean that every time I try to cheat, and you'll try to cheat, try to hold it on with your hand. Every time, unless you get extremely lucky, you are going to have a solder joint that doesn't work. So we're just going to come in. I'm just going to touch that just enough to melt everything. But I want to have a good joint on there. So I want a nice silvery joint on that wire. Remove this. Now I always give a good tug, move around, make sure it's right. Then we're going to take this wire, this red wire. We're just going to come around, just like this. And we're going to connect it to the opposite bottom, just like that. Now that looks like I could just go right in there and solder that and it's going to be no problem. But I'll tell you what, you have to have these in place and take the time to put these right in place. You'll save yourself anguish, trust me. Let me just solder this one in here. I always like to make sure I get a nice good silver connection. Just take this away. I'm just going to give a little tug on this, make sure. Look, that's good, perfect. So we've gone from the top to the other side, and that's going to allow that switch to change the polarity when we click it. I'm just going to double check the one on the screen here. Yep. Okay, good. Maybe I'll just come up a little bit more. There we go. Now we're going to do the same with the black wire. The black wire is going to come on to the other side. This is just the way I've done it. So this is my convention. You don't have to do it this way. You can put these wires on in any sort of way. You can have, so you could reverse the black and the red, it doesn't matter. This is just the way I've done it, and I've done them all the same so that I have a system. Okay, good. And we're going to bring this one, I always zip this one underneath the other red wire there, just to keep things as neat as possible. Pull this through. And it's going to go to the opposite on the other side. Okay, and again, I'm going to put my helping hands on there just to get that in the right spot. Always helps to have that wire bent down a little bit, and then just ease it into place gently, because if you go too hard, the wire bends up the other way and it won't touch. So what you really want is you want those wires actually touching the connection if you can. If they're not touching, then they will separate sometimes before the solder hardens. Okay, so now we have our our black and our red power coming into the switch. They're going into the top, and we've got our red cross and our black cross to allow that switch to be able to change polarity. Now the next step that we're going to do is we're going to need a piece of this wire that I have prepared before. So I'm just going to snip that. I'm going to snip an orange and a blue. So the orange and the blue is the wires that we're using right now. So snip that off. So right now specifically we're going to use the blue wire because this is the wire supplying power out to the torti machines. Hopefully this is on screen enough. You can see my big ham hocks in there. But all I'm going to do here is get it just unwind just enough so that it'll fit into the strippers. And then we're going to strip an end on each one. And on the other end is going to go into this block of block connector, and you can see the other switches have already been entered into this, and so we'll just do it in the same pattern. So this one you just want to get enough so that it'll fit into the stripper. Okay, now the one end we're going to tin and snip. So what I'm going to do is snip these down so that they will just fit on those little connectors on the switch. Now another thing, word of warning or advice, when you're clipping wires or clipping the ends off some of these things, make sure you watch where those clippings go, because you don't want it to fall into one of these bars and cause a short. Okay, so careful where those go. I'm just going to tin this. I'm not sure this is on the screen or not, but you understand what I'm doing. I'm just tinning this. Okay. So now these two wires are tin. Now the way I have the convention that I'm using is I put the blue on the right side of the switch, and then the blue tracer on the other side. Now you don't have to do this, you can do it any way you want, because this is probably going to change at the other end anyway, just because it depends on how the torti are and how the switches are. I'm just going to push these wires out of the way a bit so we can get those. And there we go, right there. Now you see, I don't know if you can see this, but there's a little space there, and that's just going to be a pain in the butt. So I'm just going to try and get that to touch. And these helping hands sometimes try to help too much. Okay, there we are, we're touching. Always make sure that your iron is clean. I use two ways. I have a sponge that's wet, and I also have these little Brillo pads, or whatever they're called, the steel pads. And I use them both. You want your iron nice and clean, and you're just going to come in and just touch the solder on there. And you want a good contact. I'm going to do that just a bit more. There we go. What you don't want is to have like a crappy connection. It's going to come off 3 weeks from now, or whatever, even 3 years from now, because then you're going to have to go back and try to find out where that problem is. So let's just get this set up. Let's get it in there. I hope you can see that I want this exactly lined up so that the wire isn't going to go past the center line. There's a little center ridge of plastic in there. You want to make sure that that wire doesn't go over that, but it's located centrally and it's touching. There we go. Come in. Okay, I think that's got it. There we go. Okay, now I'm gonna hook this to the bar. So I'm going to skip one because we have our orange and red, or orange and white to come in there. So we're just going to go into the last one on this block. Hopefully we can see that. Now you got to be careful that you don't see how you don't want to run the wires right through, because you want to have them sort of in enough that they're going to be contacting the center contacts and that the screws are going to hold them in. And the other tip is don't do them too tight, but do them tight enough that they're not going to pull out. I think these blocks, these types of blocks are notorious for having wires come out because they haven't been hooked in right. So just tighten them up just till you feel the screw is getting a little hard to turn. Okay, so now that one's hooked up. So now we are ready for our, I don't usually hook these up just yet because sometimes you want to move them around and get them out of the way for the LEDs. So now we're going to do the LEDs. So the LEDs that I'm using are these. So these are red-green LEDs, 3mm. Okay. So we're just going to take 2 of those. And then these LEDs need to have resistors attached to them. So the resistors that I'm using for these are 0.5 watt, 510 ohm. They look like this. Okay, now this is a lot of guys will say use a 1 ohm resistor, but what I'm finding is because my power, the way I've hooked this up, my power is going to be coming through the tortoise to the LEDs, and the tortoise actually acts as a resistor somewhat, so you don't need as large of a resistor. And I'm just gonna back this up a bit so you can actually see what I'm doing here. Just hope the magnification is enough that you can see what I'm going to do. Now I'm going to bring in 2 other helping hands now. And these are shorter ones. And you really need something like this to do this kind of work. Just because it does need a certain amount of precision to do this. So I'm going to clamp 1 resistor like that. Just going to double check, make sure I'm in the frame here. Okay, so you see, I got 1 resistor clamped. Now I'm going to take this LED, and you'll notice the LED has a long leg and a short leg. I'm going to bend the long leg slightly down, just slightly, not a lot. And then I'm going to hook the LED into this, and I'm going to clamp both of them. This is acting as a holder and a heat sink, because I don't want to get a lot of heat into that LED. Now what I want to do is I want to have those two, the resistor and the LED long leg, actually touching close as I can. And again, if you take the time to line these up, it'll save huge frustration. And all you want to do is just touch. Don't want to linger on this. Now you can see that is attached. Don't worry if there's a little bit of a hangover, because we're going to put some shrink tube over that anyway. Okay, so there's one done. So take the long leg, bend it slightly, mount it like this, take the resistor, mount it like that, and you just want to get them to touch a little bit if you can. This one down. It's a little niggly, but and then you're just going to go in, spread that. Doesn't take much. And then you'll see you've got your connection to your LED. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use some 3mm LED holders. And this is the 3mm LED holders, okay, and they will hold the LED and then hold it into the board, into that hole that's been pre-drilled. Okay, so I'm just going to move this down a bit, and let's open these up. I'll get two of these out. So what you do is you take the little clippy end and you push the LED into that, and then it'll snap in, so the LED isn't going to come out. Do the same on the other side, so the LED isn't going to come out. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the other side of the control panel, and I'm going to fish these through the hole, and they have to come through backwards. So in other words, we have to push them in like this and then lock the little clips into place, and sometimes that has a little finesse, so just excuse me while I get back here and fish these through. Okay, now I have it through. Now what I do is I take the wires that have come through and I help guide it into the hole so that it snaps into place, just like that. Perfect. I'm going to take the other one. Guide that through. And then we're going to use the wires just to help us guide this into place. There we go. We want to snap that LED connector into place. What's going on? Sometimes it does take you got to turn it a little bit, just get those legs into the hole. There we go. And then we're done. Let's drop this back down. Okay. Now I'm going to take a piece of tubing. So this is heat shrink tubing, and it's oversized. It's way too big, but I needed one that would fit over the resistor. Okay, and these are not going to be shrunk down. Okay, so I cut this to size. I just want that to fit over that long part with the receptor, or with the resistor. There we go. And I want a little bit of wire coming out the end there, so that I can use that to hook my orange and white wire to. So again, we're just gonna get this prepared so that one end is going to go into the block and the other end is going to go. So what I'm going to do with this end, the end that I'm going to hook to the wires, is I'm going to make it a bit bigger. I'm going to make the splice longer so that I have more wire to work with, because I'm going to wrap these. You'll see in a minute. So to do that, to get a longer piece on there, you're just going to place the wire a little bit beyond the actual red stopper, and that will give you a longer piece of wire to work with. Okay? And then my convention is the orange, solid orange, goes to the top resistor light of the LED. I just wind those on. And then this wire, this whole piece here, will then just bend it down and then hook it to this one. Now you can take your little pliers here and just give it a twist just to tighten it up. You don't have to. I just do it because I'm a little weird. Then you're going to take your soldering iron. You're going to solder a nice big hunk of solder all over those wires and tin them all together. Then you're going to take your clippers, clip off the ugly end. So now you have a nice end there. Now you're going to repeat the process, except using the white wire here. And that's going to go to the long resistor wire here. Just twist that on. And then you're just going to bend this back and twist these together. And then you're going to solder this on. Tin these together basically. I just make sure that's good contact. Then you're going to trim these off. And then we're going to hook all our wires up now. Okay, so now we're going to continue with just hooking the wires up into the appropriate place. So I can take my helpers away now. And we're just going to insert, following the same pattern, orange, white, blue, white, orange, white, blue, white, orange, white, blue, white. Okay, now that's all connected. Now I'm going to connect my red wire into my power base here. It doesn't really matter literally where you put these, as long as it's on the red side. I'm just going to get the correct screwdriver for this. So again, with these, just down tight enough so they feel tight, so the wire doesn't come out. And then the black wire. And this will all have to be sorted out. I mean, the wires look complicated right now, but really, if you just do one step at a time, then it's not that bad. Now, in the end, I'm going to have to sort of clean up these wires a bit and make sure they're all going to the proper place. But I'll do that off camera. It's not something you need to see. So there we are. Now we've got all the wires connected, LEDs hooked up. Now we want to make sure there's going to be no shorts. We want to make sure nothing is touching anywhere that is going to cause a short. Everything is good. So now, are we done? No, we are not done. Now we must test. So every step of the way, so every time you hook a switch, you now need to test. Now I'll tell you, I did have actually one bad switch. So I'm really glad that I tested every step of the way here, because, and that is a rule that you're going to have to, even though it takes a bit of extra time, trust me, that rule is one that you do not want to break. Okay, so from the tortoise, you'll see that I've got this switch, or this little clamp. So what I've done is I've hooked the power to the tortoise, so the black and the red wire, and they go on 1 and 8. And then the power out to the LEDs are going off 1 and 8. Now, you could have done it off a switch, of one of these switches inside the tortoise motor, but I'm going to use those for other things. So I just opted to supply my power to my LEDs through this. So the difference being, when you click the switch, the LED will change immediately, but the switch machine will still be in operation. So you won't get, I mean, the lights will switch before the actual track switches over. So if you're a real stickler for, I want my lights to switch once the contact has been made, once the switch has actually completed its cycle, then you can use one of these switches. But for me, I don't care about that. I'm clicking it and I'm assuming that yes, the switch is going to get there within 2 or 3 seconds, and that's good enough for me. But you could use one of these internal switches here to connect your LEDs, and then the LED wouldn't change until the actual contact has been switched. But for me, that 2 or 3 extra seconds, I don't really care. I just want to know what position my switches are in, and my turnouts are in. And I'm using these things for something else. So I'm going to use this switch for the frogs. So I'm going to be powering the frogs from here, and I'm going to be using these switches for signals later on. So I don't really want to use them for the LEDs for this board. So what you want to make sure is, you'll see inside this thing, I don't know if you can see that, but there are numbers, and you want to match 1 on this one with 1 on this one. Now you'll see on the switch machine there's a little tiny one right here. So when you're hooking these up, You want to make sure 1 goes to 1. That way. Okay. And then the yellow wires are going to go into the LEDs. So here. And the reason I'm using 2 yellows here, because it literally does not matter what color or what way you hook these up, because all they're doing is going to be following whatever position the tortoise is in. So I just used 2 yellows so that we're not sort of worried about connecting wires to other wires, or if we have to change these because the tortoise is in the wrong position, that it doesn't look like we wired something up wrong. Okay, and then I use my convention of black and white and blue and red. So the black wire goes into the white. And you can see for this one, I will fix this, but you can see my wire is coming through a little bit on that one. I just don't like that. I just think it's one more thing that can touch something in short. So I will be fixing that. Not right now. So we're ready to test. So what should happen is when I click my power on, the 2 LEDs, these 2 LEDs should come on, and this tortoise motor should rev up. And then I should be able to switch positions. So let's see what happens. Okay, so don't seem to have power. So I think what's happened here is that this connection, like I said, when those wires come through, there's issues where you could miss the connection. So I'm just going to correct these. So the one good thing, or the one amazing thing really about electronics and wiring, is it's the most honest thing in the world, because if it isn't hooked up right, it doesn't work. And see, I've got this caught into this one. Yeah, there we go. So the connection here, because these had gone too far through, wasn't working. And that's exactly, I mean, I'm glad this happened, because this is exactly what I was talking about those things not going through far, or going through too far, and you miss the connection. So you saw it happen. This is the good, bad, and the ugly. We show everything here. And now you can see that the LED lights are working. And when I switch the switch, the LED lights go and the tortoise machine goes. Success. Excellent. So I hope that helped out with your wiring of your control panel. And I'll continue on. Now, as you can see, that took about half an hour to 45 minutes if you include the testing. So if you calculate, we have sort of 16, 18 switches here. It's about 9 hours to do this panel. So that's why I wanted to show you, like, in real time how long it takes. And then you can see troubleshooting some stuff that we actually had happen. And you know, you can rewind this if you want and look at it several times if you've missed a step, or if you forget what's happening. You don't have to use the same color coding that I'm using. Obviously you can use any color code you want, but I just use this because it was handy to me, kind of made sense, so I used it. You don't have to wire your LEDs the way I did. So basically, to review one last time, the power, I'm just gonna see if I can get everything in here. Okay. Okay, so the power is coming in these two here, so the red and the white. Power coming in from the power supply that I'm using. The power supply I'm using is an old computer power supply that has 12 volt DC and 3 amps current supply. So that 3 amps should absolutely cover this, all of the stuff that's in here. And I have wired in this extra wire coming from the power supply. I don't know if you can see this. This is going to go to my second control panel. So this power supply is going to run 2 separate control panels. So it's still 3 amps is a lot. So you know it should never override the power supply. Okay, so it should never exceed that power supply. And again, the wiring I've used here is all consistent with the wiring coming in. There is the connection to the power supply cord. And I've used suitcase connectors here. Really don't like suitcase connectors. I just had bad experience with them, but in this case, it was the best way to do it. So I've done it and it seems to work okay. Now, so the power comes in here, it goes into the top of the double throw switch. Now, in this case, we're not using the double pull switch. We're only using this as an on-off switch. So you could have used an on-off switch here. You didn't have to use double pull, double throw, but I wanted consistency in my switches, so I just used these. So what that means is we don't need these bottom rungs on the switch. So we just didn't use the crossover like we did here on all the other switches where we connected these crossover wires. Okay, so then the power comes into the switch. I click it, it then comes down here and goes into the power bar here, and then all of our power for each of our switches can go through this power bar, but there's not enough inputs or outputs from this one power bar, so I have to then connect it to another power bar over here. So the black wires and the red wires, it doesn't really matter which plug you put them in on these bars, as long as the black are on the black side and the red is on the red side. I tried to match them up just so later if I have to troubleshoot I can find them. So that's the power, and then that power goes up to the switch. Okay, so we have I always put the red on the right, black on the left, and in this particular case we are using the double throw, double pull reversal of current, so reversal of the voltage, so we're having it, we've connected those crossover wires, and then this middle is the power out, so it's the blue and the blue tracer, or the white, so blue and blue-white tracer are going down here, hooking into the connector bar. That connector bar is then going out, red and black, to tortoise machine, 1 and 8. So then that, when I click that switch, throws the machine. When I click it the other way, reverses the polarity, and the machine goes the other way. The yellow wire is also hooked to 1 and 8. They're going into orange and white. Orange and white are then going up and connecting to the LEDs, one on each side of the circuit. Okay, the LEDs are red-green, so they need to be hooked so that when one is red, one is green, and you just do that by connecting the one pole. You basically connect the top and the bottom. So the top with the resistor of one LED to the bottom of the other LED, and that then makes sure that they are, when the current flows, it flows in the opposite direction through each LED. Okay, so I hope that helps, and I'm gonna now go and straighten out this mess. Now you can see that it doesn't seem like that much. I mean, when I turn this panel around, and I will once it's all hooked up and you can see it work, but excuse me, there's a lot of wires, and this is only half of it because the other half are going to have to come in too from the tortoise machines. Okay, so I'm going to sort this out. Once I get it sorted, I'll bring you back in and you can see sort of how I did it, and we'll go from there. Alrighty, thanks for watching.